Welcome to Now Serving, a Side of Therapy, your intro guide into the therapeutic world. Together, we'll explore various aspects around how to show up for ourselves and others by tending to our own mental and emotional well-being. I'm your host, Dalton Huckabee, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm grateful you've joined me. So welcome to this week's episode of Now Serving a Side of Therapy, a client's intro guide into the therapeutic world. Today we have Jeff Watson with us. He is an associate marriage and family therapist with the Master of Arts degree in psychology from Touro University. He specializes in addiction, depression, PTSD, bipolar, ADHD, and grief. Before becoming a therapist, Jeff was involved in the music business for over 20 years, which kind of reminds me, I don't know about you, but every now and then, I'll think about all these other jobs that I would also like to do, right? This is actually being a therapist is actually my third or fourth career in my life. And I still have all these other interests, but I think you have a particular history in the music business that I would have been interested in.
I have had quite an odd and lovely experience. I played in bands in basically all the 90s to the 2000s and recorded some records. No success, barely any. It was fine. It was like I always tell people being on tour is like being a pirate, because you're just going city to city and you're drinking and you're pillaging. And it's just crazy insanity. And there's a lot of alcoholism that goes on and a lot of things happen on tour, right? And then I ended up from there, I was signed to Warner Brothers in one band. And then I ended up working at Warner Brothers from 2002, 2016, Warner Brothers Records, where I met all my favorite heroes and did amazing things and had a blast. And then kind of went, oh, I'm aged out of the music industry now. There was definitely that aspect of it. And two, I'd been through my own personal things in my past. I was familiar with the language of therapy anyway. So I thought, I'm going to do it. Actually, it's funny. There was a friend of mine that I knew in the music business, and there was a period where I was going through an enormous amount of personal things happening on top of this career end of a beautiful run that I had. And my friend went, "You should be a therapist." And it struck me with gold all of a sudden. I was like, I can't do anything else, because everyone in the music industry, they all end up in real estate because they're just selling themselves anyway. It's either a record or a house. So,
and then here you are, all these years later. Nice. I mean, and that's the part that I've kind of realized recently too, when you say sometimes you can age out of the music industry. There are bands I've been following for decades and they're still around performing live. It's man, but I'm sure it takes a toll, as you said. I'm sure it's not an easy task.
When I say age out, I mean, you're right. I could talk about Metallica the entire show, as I know you could too. But real quick on that, bands like that, they can, sometimes they can do it. It's very physical. It takes a huge toll on the body, obviously. But in the music industry, if you're over 40 years old and you're a man, you're aged out. If you're a woman, it's 30 or 20 and you're aged out, because, that's how unfortunately it works out there. But
almost like sports, almost.
Yeah, actually, well done.
Well, so last episode, we with Susie, right, we were discussing how to identify red flags within the client therapist relationship and understanding boundaries also.
Mm-hmm.
Then we also got into this aspect of reflecting and reinforcing and rewarding that around how do we engage with ourselves in between sessions as we're working towards our goals or towards our therapeutic goals, right? So this aspect of reflecting, reinforcing, and rewarding. And then so today, to kind of build on that a little bit, what I was thinking we could talk about is, okay, well, last week we talked about red flags. Well, this week we could talk about some green flags, right? What are some green flags in the client-therapist relationship? And then also, which could be a big question on a lot of people's mind, is how do I tell if therapy's working?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought maybe at first we would just try to identify, like what are some like some green lights, when you're in the therapy session. And I also like to liken this idea to also to, okay, well, whatever seems to be working in the client therapist relationship, how can we then take that into our relationships in our everyday lives? Because a lot of therapy is about that, right? Is about having that safe space in order to work through stuff. And then we find this new ways of how to, work through things, and then actually practicing it in the real world.
Hmm. Hmm. Can you maybe give me some background a little bit more on the red flag conversation?
Yeah, sure. I think it was, a lot of it had to do with, the therapist isn't going to contact you in between sessions, for example, right? Or if you don't, and when I say client, again, I say this all the time, but when I say client, we could even be the client, right? So whoever the client is if we're not feeling heard, right? Or if, the therapist is like, there's going to be some self-identification that the therapist might include time to time, right? But if they're spending too much time on that instead of on the client, that could also be a red flag. So some things like that.
I see. Got it. So the green flags are, how do you know it's working?
Yeah, the green flags would be what's working within the client therapist relationship.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So for example, if the client is actually feeling like, oh, the therapist is showing some compassion and empathy,
Mhm.
right? And showing that I'm being heard and understood in
Mhm.
a way that maybe not everybody does in the client's life day to day.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, the first example I would say is that they're showing up. They're coming. If they're coming 3, 4 weeks in, there's something. There's a curiosity, at least, that you've sparked in them that is going to have them come back. And I think that's really important. The other thing, because I was kind of doing some thinking about this too before this, and it struck me about the idea of the analytic third, which is that kind of like psychoanalysis idea of like there's the analytic third is that like, or therapeutic third is that thing in the room, that space that the client and the patient creates, like you were saying before, that space where the unconscious can become conscious, so it's that part of it is like, in a sense, I almost look at it like couples counseling to a certain degree, where this is like the client, and then the couple itself is the client. I'm not saying that the analytic third is the client, obviously, but it has that power.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I have
Yeah.
not heard of that
The
before.
concept of the therapist creates a space that is freed from fear, perhaps a safe place where there's comfort enough for the client to then open up, and therefore creating this essentially maybe a playground with bouncy balls and like a really squishy place to play around. You know what I mean? Like to express all these crazy feelings that we have. So it's that sort of bubble. That's the analytic third that they call it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we've talked in past episodes around like creating that safe space, right?
Mhm.
And how to feel that containment, right? To be able to trust that whatever I bring to the table can be contained. So if I'm able to kind of engage in this vulnerable way, right? And and uh and feel safe in that containment, then it can allow for something else to evolve, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You kind of create a playground.
Uh-huh.
And
Nice. And it's a great way to think about therapy, right? Is like we're playing around with ideas.
yeah,
Because in fact, if we think about, I really got a lot out of this in the first episode where we did with Anna around values, and if you can use humor as a way of integrating into our learning um, process, right? Then it takes a lot less reps, essentially, right? Because the brain is a lot more amenable to
100%.
play.
Yeah, and you can really, it's all about that first date. That first time you meet a client, the first time the client meets you, because you're going to figure it out pretty fast. Those, are you familiar with the whole mirror neurons idea?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. In fact, I think you may have been the first one to remind me of that 2 years ago. I think you were the one who brought that up. Come to think of it, it got me thinking about it too. And the mirror neurons are going to light up. during that first date, you know? And it's so powerful. And there's another statistic that I'm pretty sure I can back up, but I think it's there, outlier, is that the therapeutic alliance, you know, which is what I like to describe as like, do you like your therapist enough to tell them your darkest secrets? Or do you trust your therapist enough / enjoy their company, you know? Whatever that is, that's 7 times more powerful for the change of the client than any modality or blah, blah we learned in school. 7
Yeah,
times.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, and sometimes it can take a while for that to develop, right? Like this may not be an overnight process. You know, as I've heard you allude to before as well. And I'd like to tag on to when you said if the client is continuing to return, you know, for, you know, 3, 4 weeks in, they've piqued some kind of curiosity. And if we can get, I've heard it said before, right? If clients can get in this space of being curious, it's a great place to be.
1,000%. I was just having this conversation not 10 minutes ago with someone about curiosity and how that's it. I was actually doing some research on awe and wonder and the science behind it, and the evolutionary science behind it, and just kind of think it's sort of new people are looking at awe and wonder, I guess, differently now, and more of an evolutionary thing. But it's such an important thing. But that does come from that sense of curiosity, which is then inherent within that curiosity. You have to have humility because you don't know everything. But with curiosity and awe and wonder, then causes that kind of cognitive reframing in its cognitive fitness. You have to think more because your whole world went, I didn't think that could be done. The moon is beautiful tonight. Wow, the scar, you know what? It's exactly that. So curiosity is key.
Nice. Nice. Love that. Yeah. I mean, that could definitely be considered of, you know, but, you know, again, having that safe space to, you know, enter into the kind of this playground of ideas from this curious space. I mean, sounds like a green light to me, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and even just from like a kind of like a logistical standpoint, right? Like even something as simple as um active participation, right? Um and reliability, right? And responsibility. Even these little things that exist between the client therapist, you know, even those kind of values can also contribute to the sense of like, okay, this is allowing us to move forward because we are responding to one another in this way, such as, for example, arriving to session on time, right? Or at least giving a heads up, hey, I'm going to be a few minutes late, right? So that you're kind of engaged in one another, whether that's the client or the therapist, you know what I mean? It doesn't
Right.
matter, right? But and so as long as we're kind of like engaging in with each other from that kind of this responsible and reliable way, like saying, "Hi, I'm showing up for you, and you're also showing up for yourself." And so together we can meet there in that space and
Yep.
practice on it, and then we can build from there.
It's funny. I have a metaphor for that I like to use. It's only a certain age you'll get this. Most do. I'll usually tell clients, like, you ever seen Rocky? You know the whole Rocky thing, Sylvester? Yeah, of course. I said, like, my job, I think sometimes is to be Mick, the little Brutus Meredith in the corner, because you're Rocky. You go out in the ring during the week. You practice the uppercuts that we learned in the ring. You come back. I water you off. I go, oh, there, get him, client. Come on, I know you can do it. You know, and it's just like, and that's right. But that's that part of it. It's that dance that it's like, we arm them with whatever we can, with interventions, with support, whatever that may be. They go out during the week. They wrestle Ivan Drago from Rocky IV, and then they come back during the ring, and we keep doing it.
Yeah, for sure. I had a client once tell me, he's like, I feel like I always come back to, you know, in the sessions, and then you just kind of like dust it off and then kind of refresh, and then I go back out again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's such an important part of therapy. It's such an incredibly important part. Going back to the whole therapeutic third stuff or whatever that is, it's that safe space, it's that playground. You know, for a lot of people, including men, you know, a lot of men don't understand what that safe space playground even concept is.
Yeah, and so being able, if like you said, if they can be in that space of openness and curiosity and to explore those parts, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then so um I also wanted to kind of get into this aspect of, you know, how how can we tell if therapy is working? So if clients have been coming after, 4 weeks, after a month or so, right? And they start to think, well, how do I know if this is going to work? Especially if it's your first time in, right? Or if you have some questions about the client therapist relationship or just about the process in general, right?
Mhm.
And so a lot of people might wonder how they can tell if therapy is working. And that's kind of a big question
Mhm.
because there are a few different ways to measure that. But I don't know, I'd be curious to hear what you think. But when I think about how do we measure progress, I think of it as a way of like, how are clients' symptoms interfering with their functioning and their relationships? Right. And there can be a big degree and a big span over that. So, say, for example, um, are they able to perform simple activities of daily living?
Yep.
Right. Or
Yep.
are they able to function at work and school? Right. Are they able to successfully navigate conflict and work through ruptures and relationships, right, in a way that's actually kind of providing care to themselves and others in their lives? So that's how I kind of see this aspect of how are we engaging with ourselves and others in
Mhm.
between sessions that kind of gauge this aspect of progress. What are some
Yeah.
ways that you might think that clients might be able to gauge how is therapy working?
Yeah, a lot of it is sometimes for me when the client just stops talking about their symptoms, right? In other words, they're not causing any issues for them, and or the things that now that they know that are symptoms, like broken relationships or feeling low energy because of depression, or whatever that may be. If they're just not talking about it anymore, and then you're just checking in, that's always a sign that okay, then let's rearrange. Do you need more goals? Usually, and I've been doing this lately, to be honest with you, and just with a certain depends on the client. But if I'm comfortable enough with the client, I will kind of get to this point where I know that we're just checking in at this point. Where there's a lot of validity to it, but there's nothing coming up. There's no there's nothing in the future necessarily. All the relationships have been fine. My new thing is I'll kind of smile in the beginning of a session and say, so what do you got for me? So kind of planting this idea that we're going to have to talk about some goals and kind of see where this is going. But it's kind of a way to reassess. Another thing that I do like to do this is I just check in with my clients, once every month or so or whatever it is. Just want to see how it's going. I'll frame it usually like people are like, you're working at a restaurant and you're eating at a restaurant, the manager comes by all the time and he's like, how's the food tasting? This is I'm kind of doing the same thing right now, and they get it. They're like, oh, okay, cool, And so I love doing that because I want them to know, obviously, that this is a dance that we're doing. This is all that. Sometimes we'll samba and sometimes we'll tap dance or whatever that is, right? So it's kind of a long-winded way of suggesting it, but it's really about ultimately what are your goals and are you good?
Yeah, no, because what I was thinking when you were talking about that is therapist observations,
Yeah.
right? That can be a way to kind of like gauge, like, especially if you're talking to, if we're coming in and we're talking about, you know, or what's going on, that's something that's distressing us, and maybe eye contact isn't there, like, or maybe, but in body language, like whatever that might be, right? And then maybe they're sitting up taller, and later on down the road, right? Or maybe they have a smile on their face after a while, right? So, like you said, even the therapist's own observations of the client can be a way of
1,000%.
monitoring progress.
I mean, look, I just had a massive win when I was just talking to a kid who didn't want to see my face at all on Zoom. And finally, he relented like 2 days ago. And it was, because and obviously he was comfortable enough and safe enough to have a Zoom conversation to see my face, right? So that's progress, right? And those are the little things that I like to look out for, the little tiny things. Um, I even tell my clients this all the time. I'll say there's like stories flying around us all the time. And little tiny little things, and like life goes by us like white water. So if we can just slow down for a second and just actually look at what just happened, awareness, that's crazy important. And that's what I like to do in sessions too. Sometimes when they'll mention a change, I'll like almost kind of dramatically with the client, whoa, what was that all about? Time, whoa, like, really? I'm like, yeah, look at that. Holy crap, what are you made of? Look at you.
Nice, nice. Yeah, and so even the reason why that kind of like transparency, right, for the client to be able to come and like share these updates, right, or share what's kind of like what's going on with them, why that transparency is so important is because sometimes the way of tracking progress is based on what the client's reporting, right,
Right.
that qualitative information. And so whether that, they might be, there's an app called Reframe,
Yeah.
right, that some people might use for like reducing substance use.
Yep.
And so, but a lot of that is like, hey, I have to be honest with the information that I'm putting in there, right?
That's so
Or
true.
if I'm doing a mood journal, right? And kind of like, again, having that ability to be able to do that kind of like self-assessment and, being honest to the best of our ability, right? With where we're at the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tend to, I just, I don't know. It's like once you've established that analytic third, to go back to it, once you've created that space, then you can read your client well enough, and your client can read you well enough to kind of start to under you. It's hard. I don't know. You sort of know when you see it in them, and I know it's super vague, but when they have an insight, you know what this is. You're having the client see the insight, and quite honestly, the clients will tell me when they're better. And you're right. They can obviously not they could sort of fudge their own self-reporting, but when you've created that third, that space, you can see it.
So yeah, so those are some qualitative ways, right, that can we discuss around measuring progress. Some other ways that might be a little bit more kind of like statistical in nature, if you will, like using quantitative data.
Yep.
And so there are like questionnaires out there, right, that they're still self-reporting, right, but they do give this more numerical value towards tracking progress, such as like with the GAD seven, like 7 questions, and you could use that like from week to week to track. Okay, hey, how are these? Certain anxiety symptoms. What was the frequency, kind of severity, duration, pretty much, right? And did it impact the functioning or relationships
And that's the
throughout
key.
the week?
Right. Yeah. I use them usually at the beginning, like the third, fourth, maybe when I kind of have an idea of sort of like what's really going on. I'll I'll administer them to give me kind of a baseline of understanding, a numerical baseline, obviously, and then I'll kind of work around that. But I'm also a lot more holistic and like dialogic with my approach. So I think it's an important baseline to have, but highly interpreted by different ways.
So, are there other ones that you use?
I've only used a few. I mean, I've used specifically for like a bipolar one, and like it's with like specific clients that I've been using ADHD. I mean, obviously, I can't diagnose ADHD. I'm not diagnosing bipolar, but to kind of give me an understanding, a bit of, again, more of a baseline for it. PHQ, I'll use Beck. I'll use. Depends on kind of obviously where I'm thinking I'm going to go.
Yeah, and because we're tracking, right? That's essentially what we're tracking.
Oh, it
Yeah.
is.
And you mentioned the PHQ, right? It's a patient health questionnaire, right? For those wondering, right? That can be used to identify potential depressive symptoms.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, like you said, kind of using these questionnaires to kind of track over a particular period of time, because again, what we're looking at when we're considering symptomatic expression, right, is severity, right? Is it mild, moderate, or high?
Yep.
Right. And then the frequency, right? How many number of times over did that behavior occur over the past week? And the duration, how long is it?
Uh-huh.
And so, we can kind of even get into tracking progress by looking at some of those aspects of this kind of quantitative data too.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's fun, I take the qualitative, I take the quantitative, throw them into a big bouillabaisse and see what comes out of it.
Exactly, exactly. Right. A nice blend.
Yeah.
Outside of this kind of qualitative and quantitative space, right, that we've talked about, there are also some other ways that we can think about when you talk about like this holistic approach, right, that you referred to, right, such as how's the client sleeping, right? Like, how do they feel in their body? Maybe before, like if they had, some, Anhedonia, meaning that they stopped having interest in certain things and now they've regained interest in certain things again, right? So even things like this can be signs of like, hey, maybe things are shifting for me.
Uh, 1000%. I tell my clients sleep is God. Sleep must be respected and adored and worshiped because it's like this commodity that people just sort of throw away. Oh God, sleep is the last thing on my radar at this point. And I offer as much psychoeducation as I can without being a doctor in my sessions, especially with teenagers. As we all know, they are doom scrolling until 3 a.m. They have no concept of circadian rhythms. They don't even understand why they should be asleep at midnight, or am I saying 10 p.m. maybe? So, and it's, and again, doom scrolling. And so I really try to, because I always say that too. I said the sleep patterns are going to be the warning bell that something is wrong, usually, right? So it's symptom, at that point, it becomes symptom awareness. The other thing I do like to talk about with my clients is that, the anxiety is always going to start in the body somewhere. So it's going to be somewhere. So usually for most people, or some I should say, there's going to be some sort of a leg shake or something's going to happen. I explain to my clients, I say, I realized 5 years ago that my right hand starts shaking for some reason when I'm getting excited. So for me, that's a warning bell. It's a lighthouse to say, slow down, because externalizes my anxiety. So that's the somatic thing. So by making them aware of those somatic reactions, then it becomes that warning bell to give them the space to, maybe pause and not go nuts with the amygdala.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that's such a great point because oftentimes because our responses to symptoms when they come up are so automatic and so habitual because we have a lot of practice with them, right? Right? That it's we've reacted in such a way that we're almost kind of blindsided. It's like, oh, it just happened before I knew it, right? Like I couldn't control it, right? That might be something that someone would say, right? I couldn't control
Because
it.
that's exactly right. That's why I use the warning bell metaphor. Or,
The
fire
warning
alarm,
bell metaphor?
a warning bell or a fire alarm or a lighthouse, something that says, uh-oh, you're about ready to do something kind of stupid because your amygdala is kicked up because your prefrontal just downregulated to go back here. So slow down.
Susie,
Sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead.
or I tell people this too. I'm like, most likely you're already going to be in the middle of amygdala attack once you're noticing this, right? It's not like, oh my God, I'm going to attack and I'm about ready to attack and then I'm going to attack. It's probably like you're attacking, but you know that you're attacking because you see it. It's a physical thing. And if you can have the awareness at that point, then you can actually do something about it by walking away for 30 minutes and doing a tip skill or fill in the blank.
Exactly. And that's when we start getting into that play space that you were referring to earlier about how can I engage in a new and different way, right? If we are looking at wanting different outcomes in our lives around particular situations, then that means we need to engage in different behaviors or different ways of responding to those challenging situations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, last week Susie referred to the uh-oh alarms. And I love that, right? I had always heard of aha experiences, but I had never heard of like uh-oh alarms.
I
So
love
I love that.
that. That's pretty good.
But yeah, but that's often about when you talk about this aspect of tuning in to what's happening in the body, right? It's this aspect of connecting the mind and body because oftentimes what can happen is where these symptoms, might express themselves is because there is that lack of connection,
Mhm.
right? So if we can work on in when we talk about working with clients, we talk about working with the client as a whole being, right? So we're not just talking about cognitive, we're talking about affective or emotional, right? Also somatic, right? Like working with the client as a whole.
Yeah, but I like the idea of the green flags though. I mean, that kind of got me thinking a bit more about that idea. Like, when do you know it's working?
Well, yeah, and what got me thinking about that is like from this kind of like strength-based idea, right? Is
Huh?
like, okay, well, if again, if I'm striving to work towards something that I want to see, of how I want to see it in my life, then there are certain things that, to engage in order to help me kind of get there. So I almost kind of think of it as this area, like almost like a value place, right? But
Mhm.
also some place to focus on, because what can happen is if we're over here and we're kind of stuck, right? Because people can get stuck sometimes, right? But the thing is they know that that's not what they want, but they don't know how to get over here.
Mhm.
So sometimes if we can identify, oh, okay, what are some things that can help us get over here? Then they might start to be able to lay that trail of how to maybe kind of get there, right?
Mhm.
And so that's where I was kind of thinking about it, is like, where can we find things that are working,
Mhm.
and how can we expand on that?
And to expand on that, I come from. I have this idea that I'll tell my clients sometimes uh, that they have these giant wings on their back. Like that. This is like fifth or sixth session. I'm like, yeah, when you came in, these giant wings on your back, the wings of Gabriel, like diamond encrusted feathers and multicolors. And you didn't know it because probably either well, first of all, they're on your backs, can't see them. Second of all, people have told you probably long enough that they're not there. You sort of kind of believe that they're not there. So part of my job is just to hold up a mirror behind you, a mirror in front of you, and go, ta-da. Then the next part is flight school. So now we're going to go. So therapy is kind of like flight school, right? It's like Top Gun. So, you're going to learn how to come down. I'll be with you on the side. We'll be going down the valleys and all this stuff. And eventually, if you're good, you're over here. I'm back at Top Gun. Come back whenever you need me. And I'll have kind of that. I'll like reinforce that conversation once I can kind of feel that maybe it's time to terminate.
Yes, exactly. Which could be another way, right? I mean, that's some time down the road, right?
Right. No, no, no.
But
Right, right. But
yeah,
the idea is
but
that they already have the answers within them to begin with.
exactly. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And that could be a way of like, hey, now's a good time to to pause. If the client is feeling like, okay, yeah, ready to fly, right? Taking your analogy, right? I'm ready to fly,
And that's the point
right?
is I'm back at Top Gun if you need me. So it's, and or I can refer to any other Top Gun navigators that can teach you more as well, But that's when I guess my point is that you sort of you can kind of see the client can fly on their own. And again, that's not from a PHQ, obviously, but that's just from the client's presentation, what they're saying, and also what you're interpreting. And by that point, you probably can interpret pretty well what they're doing because you've established the third.
I think that just kind of like these earlier episodes they're building on the prior ones, just as far as like this onboarding process. But then later on down the road, we'll be able to just branch off into individual topics that don't necessarily build off one another. I really appreciate you, kind of, stepping up. And, again, the idea here is, just to provide information for people who are, whether they've been in therapy already or not, right? But like as they're embarking upon these early stages of entering sessions, like what are some things that they can consider, right, along their therapeutic journey? And so really that's kind of the idea and intention around all of this, is just arming people with information.
And a
Right.
great name for the podcast, I must say. Also, side of therapy.
Oh, thank you. Well, any closing thoughts or anything, man?
Uh, I'm trying to quote a David Lee Roth line right now, and nothing's coming. Might be I don't know.
Go ahead, jump. How about
Yeah,
that?
something along those lines. Yeah. Hey, who said that? Baby, how you been? All right, that's all I got.
That's funny.
All
Cool,
right.
man. Thanks for tuning in this week. Be sure to check out our next episode as we continue to explore more elements of your therapeutic journey.